the secret Zen nugget of Zen about cannabis, pun intended, is that it is a brilliant mirrored edge that cuts both ways. Hey. You. Hi there. It's 4:19. Do you have a minute? Good. Then let's pack a bowl. 'Cause it's time for Cannabis Talk, a special 420 themed segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. Hosted by spiritual cannabis mystic, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa. Let's get lit, folks. Yeah. Namaste, greetings and salutations, dear audience and fellow cannabis enthusiasts. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zappo, and there is no rights infringement intended with the use of the music and the intro, and I have hitherto not had an issue with it, but I had that paranoid moment in the middle of waiting for that to play out, listening to it. I'm like, oh snap, who is this? Is this not? This is in compliance? I believe it did. I've never had a smack. Welcome to the show, folks. Welcome to the inaugural day of the official spin-off. You can now listen to this segment exclusively if you want. I will always occasionally make crossover episodes, but I will now, from hither to this date onward, post Cannabis Talk. Now relabeled I need to edit that. Snap. It says CT420, Candid Cannabis Talk. It needs to be CCT. I didn't really think that through. Cannabis Talk Candid. Oh, well, by inaugural day, I mean that today... Oh, there goes 420. 4 minutes and 22 seconds. I was going to think about trying to jam the whole show into just 4 minutes and 20 seconds and just say one brief mind-blowing thing about weed. But there you go. I didn't. We'll see if we can round it up and end the show directly at 14 minutes and 20 seconds. I got to keep an eye on the clock. Welcome to the show, folks. It is an experimental audio blog cast about my amateur, self-proclaimed amateur, completely pseudo, in the respectful sense that I don't pretend to be anything other than what I actually am, which is a creative, individual free thinker, and I'm not associated with the group of the same name in any way, shape, or form. I just, in small caps, free thinking, sort of believe in that in an altruistic, like everyone is free to think for themselves. But, as long as we all agree that that's riddled with problematic issues, unless we set some norms and lay out some boundaries, but then that gets problematic and thorny for everybody. Welcome to the show. Quick proviso. I am a respecter of the current set of legislative boundaries. I don't agree that they're unfortunately still all disparate and disjointed in this great, disharmonious United States of ours. No disrespect, I love this nation. I love the people of it more than that. Even the ones that disagree with me and think that I'm doing evil things, which I am not. And so if I sound like I'm constantly disclaimering things, it is in part the debunker of crazy in me that must constantly declare and assert as fact, certain things. Like I am not, to the best of my knowledge, in any way, shape, or form, part of any of the dark cabals, nor the deep state, etc. And no one is paying me in any way, shape, or form, other than the innocent audience listeners that discover and enjoy my podcast content on the various channels and avenues by which they can find it. By the way, full disclosure, this is made using the Sprecher app. That's the German word for speaker, both the physical object invented by man and the individual human person doing the activity. The German word is Sprecher. I would think is a better German pronunciation of it. Or Sprecher. Sprecher.com. Go check it out if you're interested in listening to podcasts and supporting creatives such as myself. If you'd like to specifically check out my content creation universe, because there's a lot more going on in the Zeppoverse than just this podcast, please be sure to visit solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. That's solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. Pins on the corkboard about my identity et al. Has been explained in previous episodes. You'll find it eventually once you explore the podcastiverse that is available here on Sprecher and its many distributive channels. If you ever want to get involved in the community, come on down to Sprecher.com itself, get yourself a free profile, and engage with the content by commenting, asking your questions. That's part of the experimental feature of this and all the shows, especially in a future-casted, sort of forward-moving kind of way. Trying to lean into that some more. Okay, so happy 420 Day. As I've already said before, I celebrate the cannabinoidal reasons, both for revelry, akin to or similar to the way the Irish celebrate St. Patrick's Day, despite the weirdness that you could get into in a debate about the meaning and or social contextual value of the holiday and the way in which we celebrate it and what it may or may not stand for. Setting all of that aside, I celebrate cannabis for it's now slowly becoming legal in these grand US of A and its corporate mindset and its economic activities. And I think some more progress, innovation, advancement, reform, and focus on equity must be enforced by us, we, the people. And that's what this show is about, friends. And it's also like a pretend fictional MacGuffin, a real-life pretend fictional MacGuffin. My show is not fictional, although I portray myself as the character that I am creating, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. I'm a real person here on planet Turth, and also on planet Hearths, and also on planet Mother Womb, and also on planet Earth, and also on planet This is a rock, not a table, and also on planet Flat, this is flat, haha. One of those exists somewhere in the timeline. As I'm sure I am quite likely to be. Is that a belief? Is that a conviction? Is that a phenomenological experience? That's a question over on the questions column of the pin board. An imaginary tool that is a part and parcel of this and all the Zeppoverse shows and the books themselves. So, hopefully that whetted your curiosity beak. I invite you to probe further. Let's talk about Cannabis Day. As a yet to be fully formulated cultural phenomena, it is in gestation, I propose to you, dear listener. Now, presumably, you're here for one of three reasons. And I was about to introduce my imaginary fictional literary sidekick character, DJ Zed, but we'll put a pause on that for a second. He has multiple pins on the cardboard flowchart of what is the Zeppoverse as well, by the way. And for those who are listening, like, what on earth is the corkboard? Really briefly, I have a real corkboard. So that if you ever watch any of the live streaming crossover shows or any of the live streaming content, you'll see it. And if this show ever becomes a full-time live stream podcast, which it could if I just fired up the thing, but for some reason my brain stops working in the same way. If I know there's a video camera and I also have to work all the technical gear, like scenes and responding to chat, I can't do it. I need like a cast of crew, people that chat with me on the show. I need like my lounge entourage to make this show truly what it is intended to be. But pretend along with me, friends, as you are the basement level, the sub-basement level, whatever you want to call it, negative 4.20, considering there's probably many sub-levels to this imaginary basement that is the vision mapping, manifesting architecture of this dream I have. Welcome to it. Thank you for listening. Let's listen to a little bit of DJ Zed, Cleanse the Palate, and talk about where we're at and where we could, and should, I think, go with it. As we contemplate cannabis itself, the simple reality that it's a plant that apparently has healing properties. It has been hyper-vilified for who knows how long, and has anthropological evidence in the record. Excuse me, I'm getting like a hiccups frog in my throat. I kind of want to burp, hiccup, and fart all at once, and it's awkward. But that's just one of the things that one of the various iterations of the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo actually has to deal with in his comedy, sci-fi, adventure fiction story. But I digress. Imagine, if you will, that we're about to settle down and fire up a thing. Imagine also, if you might allow me, that I was doing this live actually at 420 today. But although I totally failed. I'm doing it at 5:20. It's 5:39 already. Welcome. But we're doing it now. Thanks for joining me. I don't know if we've got any live listeners. I can't tell. But I guess I could try inviting and using the invite Facebook friends feature. Except I'll be really frank. If someone were to pop into my room and point a broom at my head and say, like, name for me everyone you know in real life that, like, smokes weed, I'd honestly be forced to answer. I honestly couldn't produce those names for you right now at will. And they'd be like, don't fucking lie to me. And I'd be like, sorry for the F-bomb. I'm trying to keep those to a minimum. That's ding. I don't have my ding bell. Where's my ding bell? It's way out of place. It's way over there. Hold on. Technical and scenic adjustment. I'd have to be like, no, for reals, like a camp man. Like, I just hit this bong and like I can go on a diatribe about whatever and then memory will emerge, but you're going to point a broomstick and or any other threatening object in my face and demand information, and my brain's going to go a clear blank. Not out of fear, but out of wanting to help you heal your anger issues before we have any other kind of important conversation. And not out of wanting to protect anyone, but also quite honestly, I've always been more of a face person and not a name person. Like, you ask me to drop names from my real life relationships, I'm going to fumble some embarrassing balls that will probably enrage a few exes and offend relatives, relative family members and friends that probably thought of themselves as family at the time. And for that, I'm eternally ashamed in a sincere and not too problematic way. And honestly, always begging, always praying the I don't know how to pronounce that word, but the Hawaiian forgiveness prayer for the, to just not deal with the technical pronunciation of the word. When I sing it, it comes out in a way that I think is cool. But if someone were to point their fingers in a gun shape at my face and be like, what's the actual culturally appropriate way to pronounce it? I'd be like, bro, I have no effing clue. Insert stand-up joke that is not that one guy's stand-up joke about the nice way of saying the bad word is effing, because I don't even know how his joke goes anymore. But I know in my brain that I heard one in the last 3 years, and I don't want to be accused of ripping him off, so I'm not going to try to make one. I'm just going to drop the insert note. One day I'll rewrite this episode and for fiction's purposes, and I'll craft a really good stand-up joke. Fingers crossed, knock on my bell. Manifestation bell is handy. Okay, friends, hallelujah, and let us take a moment, truly a moment, to be grateful. That's long enough. We don't need to do 30 seconds or nothing. You can get really bored especially if you happen to be high. And yes, this show is intended for people who are stoners, understanding that there are wide-ranging personality types, political affiliations, belief systems, and there are plenty of people that the sort of centrist, center middle gooey bell curve part of the community might be shocked and amazed and surprised by, right? Because at the center of my show is the following theoretical concern. And I put it in the theoretical because I believe public discourse should be treated in that fashion. Public, aka sort of packed in and folded in, which sometimes needs to be unpacked. That's a pin on the corkboard. I've unpacked it before somewhere, and I don't need to unpack it again to waste your time and get distracted. Amateur, there's a certain meaning, and sometimes it's used negatively. I mean it in the most neutral and or positive way. Public, as in open to all those who are members of the public. Period. I think globally. And this podcast, by the way, has the technical reach of the Almost Daily Zencast, from which it originates, is indeed enjoyed in 21 plus different countries. Small, but kind of enthusiastically growing. I don't want to quite say quick or fast, but enthusiastically growing audiences in 21 different countries, for which I am deeply, deeply grateful for. Thank you for your listenership. Whoever you are, whether you're an old-time listener coming back or a new-time listener checking it out. I would propose to you, friends, a few things. In no particular order. We should, as a community of communities, given all the stipulations I just laid out, right? And all due respect, I don't want to hit on disharmonizing themes, but rather themes that we can indeed unite about. We can deal with the disharmony later. That as a community of communities, we should do the social legwork together. And this is me putting in that one little baby half step forward, dipping my toe in the community psyche waters of the giant pool of social discourse, and proposing that we should work towards the following things, in no particular order. Creating a global awareness day, which can be secular, obviously, for April 20th. And some might retort back, duh, it exists already. There's people talking about it who don't smoke weed. Yes. But I mean, if it isn't licensed yet, and there isn't a nonprofit fundraising yet, and then there isn't an event with a concert and safety protocols, and here's the important part, which harmonizes with another one of my bullet points, cultural norms that are really high value and high moral level awareness, and that aren't sort of arbitrary and corporate, and that aren't being designated by corporate interests necessarily. Although one hopes, and here's a cluster of pins on the corkboard, that under the influence, both the physiochemical, psychological, and theoretical spiritual influence of ritual cannabinoidal use and intake, and participation in the community, right, with that sort of vibratory field on and aware and receptive. And for those who are like, what vibratory field? I'm like, smoke. And if you smoke weed and you don't realize that it activates sensory apparati, plural, apparatuses, for those of you who don't know how to conjugate too well, or are stuck on a popular cultural misuse, there are multiple fields of awareness beyond the typical senses, and cannabis facilitates the activation of those systems and the conscious awareness of those systems. That which may be, and I'm going to go off on a limb here and then try to reel it back, that which may be negatively described as the incapacitative inebriation of cannabis, one can, with practice, realization, moderation, and mindful awareness and self-regulation, realize that it is not inebriation as such, not as defined, not as legally defined, because it is one of those words in the dictionary that also happens to be encoded in law for technical reasons. And whether you agree, disagree, or whatever, that's a tug of war of like refining the law if we want better safety and or less abuse, and a whole nother discussion. Pin on the corkboard. It's not inebriation as such, especially if you're not over consuming. But it has its cliff's edge. That's why I opened the show with the statement that I opened with. And such, I would hope for in the future to live in a world where we have a global community set, like it becomes both an agnostic or secular and sort of not religiously affiliated, but there's literally one or two or more churches of cannabis out there in the world, to call it a sort of sect category. Sect, not sexual. And people sometimes mishear or misinterpret that word, but that's an actual technical term from analysis of religious organization. Let's just call it a category. People are creating that sort of thing. And one might put me in that category, which I do live in the timeline of I didn't, but I coulda, shoulda, woulda, might have. And I may write my own sci-fi, artistic license, self-fan-fictioning spin-off side series about characters that do, or that have, or that will create a new cannabis, church of. Full disclosure, I am, for both stand-up comedy reasons and legal purposes. I'm disclosing this for both, and I'm just so that everyone's aware. I am an ordained minister in two, what some might dismiss as phony religions. One being the Universal Life Church, which I realized it was so long ago I signed up. I don't have a working knowledge about what any of their surface promotional stuff says, let alone if there's any controversies involved. So I should write down, I really need a third surface near me to put note. Damn it, I do have one. It's just way the F over there. I need to do a self vibe and ethics check on Universal Life Church, online church. I've never attended any kind of meeting, congregation, convention, online or in real life. And like I said, I couldn't remember any sort of motto, logline, explanation, thesis, theory, or theology about it, other than it's an online church that welcomes anyone and everyone and is meant to be really minimalist in its dogma, and that I think it might be on the verge of being like the Onion Page sort of parody, or maybe almost exclusively about legally qualifying to be a practitioner of legal, but not in the courtroom weddings. Whatever that, there's a job title for that. I forget what that word is. I'm not going to struggle to remember it. Right. I was going to introduce some DJ Zed so I can take a hot minute. For those of you who are longtime listeners, I struggle with talking in such a way that I'm not practicing any of my vocal warm-up techniques I was trained in, because I'm a lazy bastard. For some reason, I wanted to be really choosy about what to play instead of just playing this one. We're just going to play this one. Ladies and gentlemen, old-time listeners, a character that needs no introduction, fresh ears allow me the opportunity to introduce the one, it is a personal honor to have known this fictional individual since its design and conceptual assembly. The artificial, animatronic, living clockwork, party, entertainment, discotheque, DJ, and host, stern, stoic co-host, DJ Zed, the robot music producer and originator, founder of the literary fictional musical genre that exists exclusively on SoundCloud and the pages of the Zeppoverse in their written form, Discotheque Synthetica. Cybernetic electrophonic recalculation. A special mix of cybernetic digital love. That was City of Synthetica Dreams Tripped. DJ Zed. From an album whose name I cannot read. Maybe we should put the album name in the beginning. I don't know. Synth City Groove Pad. Live to tape. Digital robot rock, I guess. I don't know. It's soft rock, dance rock. That's what we want to call it. I can tell by your eyebrow subtle incline that you're not quite pleased with my outro on that. Welcome, friends. Welcome back. So, celebrating a holiday, obviously. Like any of the other drinky holidays, I must state emphatically that our cultural norm should be one of conscious, mindful, safety-first arrangements, right? Like, do it in a way that isn't going to get you in trouble, isn't going to cause problems for others, isn't going to break the law unless, like the law is wrong. And I don't know, is about enjoying not only your own physiological experience, because I do often encourage a very private phenomena in terms of cannabis or cannabinoidal rituals, but also like Thanksgiving a bit about spending time with, sharing cannabis with, maybe even breaking bread a little with, and grooving with, listening to some music with, discussing deep thinky thoughts with, discussing each other's state of well-being with, and doing it in a way that involves the word revelry, but doesn't dismiss and or ignore the realities that cannabis heals. Cannabis heals, folks, and not in a snake oil salesman, fake religion kind of way, but in a metaphysical, alchemical, I think, and biomechanical kind of way. Now, in order for all of that to make sense, I think, for those who are not deeply imbued by cannabinoidal influence and are not an active member of the international global community, because although it's probably known as something that only a certain marginalized demographic does at the local level, historically, both in the postmodern sense and in the reaching back into ancient times kind of way, cannabis has been a global transcendent in terms of it transcends boundaries of geographic location. It transcends levels of class and institutional participation in or outside of government or those in power, etc. It transcends faiths and religions, and has been marginalized and or mitigated against by governments of all kinds, all types, and vilified and castigated and disparaged by religions of various orientations as well. Curiously, can be found in Christian traditions of the earliest centuries, as if it were a perfectly cool, perfectly normal part of God's good green earth's bounty, which, pin on the corkboard, has been something we've discussed in flightful, touching ways and in depth, both, maybe not so much directly in Cannabis Talk episodes before, but I think more broadly in Almost Daily Zencast. But it's part of what some might posit is a theosophy. It might be a theoretical philosophy. It might be some sort of amateur poetry jam. I don't know. I'm definitely weaving many kinds of interconnected weeby wibs ingredients together. Not the least of which include some things that are dismissed as woo-woo new age nonsense. But I digress. New cultural norms. Back to that bullet point list. New, fresh, updated, postmodern, mindful, and I mean like in a secular Zen kind of way, not based on any one particular school of Zen thought kind of way, but in the lowercase mindfulness, lowercase Zen, lowercase transcendental, experiential kind of way. And that may take some bit of explaining to help others wrap their mind around, have they yet to experience it? And that might also require a bit of talking through to help those who have potentially experienced such phenomenological experiences to which I am referring with this terminology and have yet to process it at a explaining oneself way, right? And I think that we need new cultural norms there because some of the phenomena and effects there are not, in a situational sense, in a context-relative way, not exactly often considered quote-unquote good, especially if not prepared for, mitigated for, in a allowing for the person to conk out and take a nap kind of way. Now, unexpected and undiagnosed and misunderstood, that can seem not only alarming, but potentially dangerous and something that is what gets easily latched onto, and often by those out with nefarious purposes to address the spectrum of perspectives that can be interpreting and or analyzing this fact. is this fact is often used as part of the broader spectrum of things and or statements made to vilify, make sound nefarious, and otherwise castigate, disparage, and make sound bad. I would drop a bit of Shakespearean wisdom. According to the bard, there is nothing good nor bad, but thinking would make it so. And I don't know if I got that quote dead right or a little off, but I think it's somewhere right up that alley. And that's a whole package that needs to be unpacked. Because, of course, the instant response is that there must be objective evil, and obviously some people wave that banner in an abusive way and in a blind faith kind of way, but reeling it back in. The best cultural norms, in my opinion, must include a thoughtful investigation into best use and safety practices, right? Like getting, and some of these are dumb common sense things, which we ritually and culturally normalize and misuse and abuse over there in drinky land world, I might add. Not in a judgy, cast mental, I'm not a whatever the kind. Is teetotaler a person who does drink or doesn't drink? Sometimes my dyslexia is not about direction, but rather about twin terminology that then becomes interchangeable in my mind. Like, I do not want to abolish alcohol, right? Does that make me an abolitionist? Or were the abolitionists I forget. I get really dyslexic about those terms. I'm not an anti-drinker. I don't want to ban booze. I don't want to take away people's right. I do wish our society had better systems of mitigating and understanding and coping with and educating people about the bell curve of impact, because it isn't one or the other. It isn't an on-off state. It isn't a black and white, it's bad for you, it's good for you, it's evil or it's benign, course of affairs. There is a bell curve of intake that can be addressed, discussion, as a discussion vector. And there's a bell curve of impact, and each of them are as if you understand bell curves as a statistical tool, they have their bandwidth, right? They have their spectrum of range. They aren't one line, but usually when we're talking about in a broad spectrum analysis of people and how they are impacted, whether the pool is a few hundred, a few thousand, or the entire global human population. Okay. Having said all that, obviously, I'm consciously aware of and acknowledging the reality that the same is true about cannabis. Not only in terms of objective reality and how it impacts people, but also the subjective experiential spectrum of how people interpret, understand, and even materially experience those things themselves. And that's, again, given we must acknowledge the ingredient and variables that, hello, have you met the human species? Everyone experiences the entire universe in a sort of internally highly subjective, relativistic way that is entirely self-appropriate, ineffable. Only they can know it. We can draw inferences and make norms and hope for the best, but two people may never agree about, quote unquote, what the real experience actually is, means, signifies, and how it may or may not work, let alone a whole society. Whether you do not include or include those in the scientific field researching it, and alternatively, those who have had however long of a working relationship with it, given the full spectrum of history of living, of all people alive today, right? Which, of course, technically reaches way further back than when it's been decriminalized and made legally accessible for both medicinal and recreational use. I would like to point out that there's a great meme going around. I'm trying to help spread it. I don't remember who wrote it. I suspect I may possibly have created it and just don't remember, but I also don't want to take credit where it is not due. And I also don't remember its exact wording, so let me go on my Instagram. This is what I was busy doing actually at 420, which is why I wasn't on the air, but I digress. It's loading. I wish I had a cool sound effect of a robot saying loading, loading, loading in 3 different attitudinal tones, but I don't. And I'm not going to try to act it out now because I wouldn't know the choices to make. I'd have to improvise that out. Okay. Quote, a plant that can clothe, fuel. Oh, I did not make this. My eyes just caught that there's a little tiny, the Pro Cannabis Society. But that is a font. Both of those are fonts I would use. Damn it. I don't know if I made this, and I don't think that I did, because I don't usually put a little tiny itty bitty thing. If I put my name on it or my logo, it's at Mr. Zeppo and it's down in the corner or up on the side. A plant that can clothe, fuel, shelter, feed, and medicate should not be illegal. If alcohol is not illegal, if cigarettes are not illegal yet, I would, although frustrated by it, because I would really have to quit or make some really unwise choices or consequentially problematic, potentially legally problematic choices, which I don't think I would care to do over something that I already know I can walk away from, as I've consistently been able to stop smoking and not smoke and literally not have cravings or worry about it or stress out. Sometimes I have the conscious thought that I know that I would love to have a cigarette, but I also don't feel anything. At any rate, I concur with that. I agree and support that intellectually. And I would argue that as a voice of public discourse, this labor of love that is the podcast, as you understand it here and now, is my, contribution to the fight, if there is such a thing. Having said that, not only do I think we need to rally the troops and create the really, truly, ethically up and above board, morally unimpeachable holiday celebration, which obviously, given the problematic facts of human history and the way in which we tend to abuse anything and everything that can put us in a dangerous mind place, because we refuse to really address these things from a comprehensive, holistic understanding of all of that. The mind, the inner space, the way emotions reverberate and influence behavior, the way our behavior works at all, straight sober, under the influence of insert various, the wide range of substances, including the supposedly benign, ones that are not illegal. And therefore, as a collective, as a community of communities, no matter where we are starting from, I want to pitch a big, broad, open tent that says, hey, folks, we got to step carefully and consciously and mindfully moving forward. And that involves communicating with each other beyond the minimal, chit-chat of cannabis, beyond the stereotypes and beyond the back and forth of the fundamental version of our left-right tug of war. If there is a left-right tug of war about cannabis, which there obviously is, and it's sort of presumed to just be a strand on the rope, but it is, I would also argue to you, dear friends and listeners, particularly those of you who are participants of the community, whether as allies or as partakers of, most especially as partakers of, it is our own tug of war rope. And the more we approach it that way, the more we contribute to the broader spectrum left-right struggle. Not that I believe in that us versus them divide. Complicated, nuanced opinion pins on the corkboard. I don't want to be on the left or the right. I want to live in a world where healing cannabis facilitates our transcendence of those false dichotomies, so we can actually see real-world problems as they are. That includes a self-reflexive look at cannabis use, and the criminalization the criminalized side of it. And that's a double-edged sword that cuts all ways, because there's the wrong ways it has been approached by those who make the laws historically at all, and that's a whole set of nuanced booby traps facing all kinds of directions, and the way in which people and our behavior, not in relationship to the law, but into moral discussion, the moral matrix of what is really, truly right and wrong, right? Cannabis is not a gateway drug to anything, I would argue. Not physiologically, not chemically. But the human being is the human being, and that's the variable that's not really ever taken into account in the broadest spectrum of the argument. On the biggest strand of all the biggest ropes, they ignore that part. And we must be vocal advocates of that, because if there's nothing else going on in the deepest levels that we could argue there's a common ground we can access, is that cannabis is a spiritual facilitator as well as a healing plant and herb. And there's spins on the corkboard about plant consciousness and discussions about that that we've both referenced and taken deep dives on in the podcast before, and that we will be coming full circle to discuss again in the very, very near future, as well as in the long distance future. But I want you all as an audience to just start to percolate on all of that, right? If we are going to create a world movement, we should not neglect those things. And we should recognize that just like organized religion, there's going to develop community identities that are bifurcated subvariants of the overall meta pro-cannabis 420 matrix. Or I shouldn't use that word, because pin on the corkboard, matrix means something and it shouldn't be ideological constructs. Let's have that discussion again soon. We don't want to just radically ignore that part, because that's one of the levels in which they can hijack. They being the corporate moneyed interests of those who do not care about the plant and its entheogenic history and its roots with in Aboriginal spiritual practices, and the lessons that we could, as postmodern participants in the ritual of ingesting this plant in all the different ways we can ingest it, and learning that all of the same synergetic synthesis applies to how we might integrate a new use and practical development of its sister plant, hemp, which is a whole nother big, broad spectrum discussion. Multiple pins on the corkboard. From hempcrete to hemp wood to hemp fibers and fabrics and clothes. There's a broad spectrum of markets and industries that must be developed, and be developed with strong, loud advocates on every front, voices speaking with clarity about how to keep integrity in this burgeoning marketplace of new industry, so that it doesn't in 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years' time become what there seems to be, I might argue, a tendency for corporate investitures and corporate entities to become. Because of, hello, have you met the human species and its problematic addiction to psychological and psychopathological addiction to greed and avarice? ? Both at a totally platonic, and I don't mean sexual, but scientific sense. Even if I were a materialist, my previous statement would be absolutely true, I think, in my mind. And I invite you, I don't demand of you, I invite you to consider, to join me on this roller coaster of thoughts by allowing them to enter your ears and dance trip the light fantastics of your imaginarium, which is an actual, I think, function of the brain, pin on the corkboard. And let's try to do this not just once a year on the holiday, but on the every so often, dear friend, and now official member of the audience. And with that, friends, I think I'll bring this episode to a close so it doesn't... I have the capacity to ramble for way too long. If we were at an actual party gathering, I would be one of the first people there if I knew about it early enough in order to volunteer my services. And if I was hosting it, I obviously would, right? To help set up and blah, blah, blah. Having been on many small, sort of social gathering that requires organization of various ilks, types, and brands. And I would be one of the very last in terms of what it was within decorum and the rules of hospitality allowed to leave based on whatever expectations were established by the host. And of course, completely different based on whatever expectations I myself would set if I were hosting the event. In order to facilitate and help the exiting with as zero footprint impact on the home and surrounding environment as humanly possible. We would be talking much longer. And I would be talking about it the entire time. Because we can multitask. We can sit around and set up and make things look awesome and pro. And I say that I can do this because I've worked my entire life in one sort of interesting part of the entertainment venue industry, coming at it mostly from a technical standpoint, from a setup and, load in and load out and run the show perspective. But I digress. I was also trained and have worked professionally as a performer, both on film and in various ways, and on stage mostly, primarily, like 90% of the work actually. And not just locally and not just at the amateur level, but humbly I say, like internationally. Not to great, huge, be able to start my own corporation level success, unfortunately. But hey, it's all part of a lifelong trip. And according to all those who would advise me, should I invite them to advise me professionally, I am exactly where I am meant to be. And things are about to unfold beautifully. And thus, I end the show. Thank you, and namaste, friends. And may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. I'll see you when I see it. Thank you for dropping in. I invite you to drop in as often as possible. Well, folks, that bowl is cashed and dusted. Thank you for joining me for yet another most excellent session of Cannabis Talk. Stay lit, pay it forward, and remember, the world needs healing, and cannabis heals. Until next time, I have been your spiritual cannabis mystic talk show host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. For coughing. As my old and very dear friend of mine used to say, I guess he still says it, I don't know. He would say, after a good, solid coughing fit, he would, kudos himself. He'd pat himself on the back and say something like, yeah, way to get it in there. And I would ask him I asked him once, after a while of watching him do that, what is that about, man? And he responded, when you're coughing, it's like the opposite of when you're coughing because of cigarettes. When you have a smoker's cough, you're like hacking out your lung because it's all gross and nasty and dying from the tar. When you've got the cannabis cough, you're getting the healing nutrients, CBDs and THCs, from the cannabis smoke deeper in your lungs, which is helping to push out and clean all the gross, nasty shit. So that cough is like healing. It's the healing cough. Of course, I am severely paraphrasing him, and he was, at the time of that conversation, we were both extremely high. But I digress. A little bonus material for the next Cannabis Talk episode. Okay. And now for the outro. Everybody talks to their cannabis. Well, I mean, maybe not everybody, but I would put money. I'm not a betting man, but if someone forced me, if I met someone and was like, I bet, I don't know where I'm losing my track. Back to the quippy version. Everybody talks to their cannabis, but how many listen really deeply to her? I humbly invite you, friends, especially if you grow for yourself, and rock on, bless you, and keep it safe and sane, and within the thing you agreed to. Because remember, the thing about laws is, in theory, we agree to them until we disagree. But that's a whole nother discussion. Pin on the corkboard, episode yet to be made, probably. Talk to your plants the way, the green thumbs about normal plants talk about. Like, talk to your plants. It makes a difference. Play music for them. Talk to your weed plants. If you don't grow, talk to the weed you're gonna smoke. When you get it home and you open it for the very first time, start thinking of ways to make it a little ritual. Don't take it too seriously, but let it become a little personal, private ritual. Try to make it a little special and talk to your weed. But also make time to listen to her. Especially before you get into any kind of peak periods with it. Start listening as soon as you can. She's got things to show us.